The fusion came about because there was that Phillip Glass weekend in Paris at the Philarmonie, and Phillip was playing, and they had a whole weekend of Phillip Glass related concerts, and they wanted something that would cross over into the electronic world. So they asked Bruce, and then InFiné, the label, linked me in with Bruce, and that was exactly the idea, as you said, to make something that would cross over between his world and that, more acoustic world, and then the electronic world, which I'm part of.
It is interesting though, because when we first asked Max about doing it, I didn't know that you had been so affected by Glass's music. I just knew some of your other work, but this link actually was something that I only found out later. So I guess maybe it was in there and intuitively obvious, but I didn't know. So It was an interesting, good coincidence, I think.
Yeah, my link to Phillip Glass, aside from opening, which was a piece that I loved when I was young, Coina Squazzi was a major impact on my, not just my music, but the way I do my shows. Visuals are a massive part of what I do. Most of my albums are built around visual ideas, and when I first saw that project, that was the light went in my head, and I was like, this is it, this is what I want to do, right? So I've been sort of trying to, that's been the blueprint for my solo shows essentially, and a lot of my work.
I think the impact of Glass's music on many people in many aspects of music is really fascinating. So in the last 30 years, it's almost universally an influence on all the music we hear in film and TV and advertising, to such an extent that it's really become a kind of lingua franca of the 21st century, Phillip's vocabulary. And I think that it may be also not so much that it is the influence of a single person, but rather that Phillip managed to find a language or a music that would reflect this moment. So it's a partnership, it's a collaboration between everything that's happening in the world and what he does. So it isn't really, I think, that he, as some individual creator, thought of something that everybody liked, but rather that he took the temperature of our moment and found a way to reach all those people. So it's a strange thing, because it happens very often that people ask me, do you think Phillip's music will still be played in 100 years or something like that? And I always say, I don't care at all, because what does interest me is how many people want to listen to it right now, and how many people want to listen to it not only as he composed it, but in all these other ways, like Glassforms. So that's really interesting, that the audience is so much an amalgam of many different kinds of listeners, people who listen mostly to electronic music, people who listen to pop, and then also some people who come from the classical side. So I think that's a really powerful, I guess we could even say it's a social aspect of his music, that it's bringing together all these things and all these people.
He basically played techno with a piano, right, before people were making techno in the 60s and the 70s. It's loop-based, right? Syncopation, polyrhythms. The tools of techno and a lot of electronic music were being used, by the minimalist, the early minimalist guys like Phillip.
And I think also this texture of slow change in the bass with something fast in the high registers is so much a part of his music. But then interestingly enough, it's also a part of Renaissance music. It's also a part of lots of ancient music and music from other cultures. So the idea that you put the low tones there and you allow those things to happen slowly, and you get one sense of time from those things, but then the surface is going like crazy, and that gives you another sense of time. And I think that's very much a part of your work. All the time you're doing that. These layers of actually perception, I guess, right? That you're kind of aware of two things at the same time, or at least maybe more than two, but at least two things at the same time.
I'm not a traditional musician, but what I can do is come up with a system to, how can we do this in a way which enables it to be true to the glass pieces, but also, have electronic expression. And the mechanism for that was to work with Alexander Randon software developer on this special tool which allows me to blend MIDI live from a grand piano with MIDI from what I'm playing with my synths. So we get this sort of amalgamated, modulated version of the Glass scores. So if Bruce doesn't press a key, nothing comes from the synths. It's like everything's driven by the original, scores and the original and the playing and Bruce's expression. So that all feeds into the electronics, and I'm modulating and doing live patch design, and I have this sort of semi-generative, chaotic sort of beast that I'm wrestling with, basically, as you hear in the show. In terms of the links between sciences and arts, science is about patterns in nature, and music is patterns in sound. Visual art is patterns in what we see. So there is a real fundamental link between what these things are. So there's naturally a lot of connections and a lot of beauty in sciences, and a lot of science in the arts. If you speak to most artists, they're very technical about their what they do and how they do it, and they obsess about some technicality in the same way as a scientist does, just in a slightly different realm.
I think in the end, maybe the difference is not so great between what we call science and what we might call art, that they're really just two ways that humans explore what's around them. I often am troubled by people feeling that in the arts things are just a matter of unsupported opinion. So, in fact, I think, yes, there are a lot of opinions, but some of them are supported by information.
Right.
So it's really like science in that way. The thing that's beautiful about what's been created here by Max and Alexander is that it allows this kind of synchronization of the electronic elements, and I don't just mean with time, but with all the nuances of timbre, pedaling, the simultaneity of my right and left hands, and I hear all those things coming back in different ways. So it isn't always just an obvious connection, but there are all these other parameters that can be affected by what I did. So it's really kind of a remarkable experience to sit there and find that, because I don't know what's going to come out. And yet when I hear it come out, then I realize, oh, that's because this happened. So there's always a real connection. There are random elements, but it's not at all a random event.
Yeah, it's an instrument that every time we play it, it's slightly different. You have to learn and I have to learn. We're sort of, again, that's why I said wrestling with this. I can call it a beast, because it's a sort of this thing that it wants to just sort of explode sometimes and do these weird things, and I'm battling with it, and Bruce is figuring out how to play it, and it's just it's an interesting, partially controlled, partially generative system that we interact with, which is an exciting way of doing a show, and it means we don't have to have any click. There's no BPM. There's
Right.
Nothing's pre-structured. Right. It's all really sort of improvised and following the original scores.
So I am surprised very often by what comes out of the synths and what's going on Max's side of things, but it always feels like something that's the result of something that happened on the piano. So even though I don't know what it's going to be in advance, there is this incredible kind of connection. But I find that the flexibility on my part often has a lot to do with rhythm, because especially in a larger room, then when I hear what's happening with the electronics, it makes me just take a little more time or rush a little bit. And there is this kind of interplay. It's like chamber music, really.
In doing this project, I discovered a lot of fine structure in the Glass pieces that I hadn't been aware of previously. When it came to really spending time with it, I started to find patterns. 2 Pages is a great example. It's this piece that's so simple melodically, but then it has these really interesting syncopations on the emphasis on each note. And the emphasis changes subtly, particularly when I was trying to make the record, for example, and we needed to shorten things down because some of the pieces are very long. When I tried to shorten things, there was no loop that worked, because it was like, oh, wait a minute, the syncopation's changed here, that even though the notes are the same 3 notes over and over and over, when I tried to sync it, remove a bit, it wouldn't fit, trying to fit things together, suddenly it became really obvious that there's all this other information happening that is very subtle. It's nice when you have something simple that yields so much complexity in the end, rather than just going, you can make a really complex melody and it sounds clever, but I think it's more interesting when you have something that sounds really simple and then yields a lot when you spend the time with it.
I think that's one of the reasons that people find so much intensity, listeners find so much intensity in Phillip's music, because there is this outward simplicity, but then there are these other things going on, particularly in regard to the manipulation of time. So what Max is talking about, these little syncopations, these micro syncopations really, which are probably invisible to most people's conscious mind. And yet, they are having an impact on the person as they receive this. So it's a very layered, nuanced experience, I would say, of time, principally. So yeah, it's sound, but the way you experience things happening really gets to be transformed. So yeah, the piece might last 15 minutes, but I think that often as you're experiencing it, you wouldn't feel that it was 15
Absolutely.
minutes.
Yeah, it's you need that time. When you sit down and you make some people, the audience is there listening, or you sit at home to listen, and you give something the time and really let it, something new happens, and that there's sort of beauty to be discovered in that process of escaping our rapid discarding sort of lifestyle.
I think that's one of the things that happens in this project, in Glassforms, that there are these places of great frenzy and even almost chaos. But then often following that, there can be moments of real stillness. And when you're sitting in the room with the audience, you can experience that people are surprised a little bit by that. And that as obviously as they get engaged by the loud virtuosic parts of the pieces, but then following that, there can be an equally intense kind of involvement in this very reflective tranquility that often comes after. So I think that's one of the things that he does, and I hope we preserve that this space for reflection or even self-discovery, if I could go that far.